So the Daytona 500 is history. Ryan Newman, Kurt Busch, 1-2 for Roger Penske. Great upset. But before we go to California Speedway and see what Gillian Zucker, the president of California Speedway, has lined up for us in Los Angeles and Hollywood and on to Las Vegas, 3 hours up the road, and see what Bruton Smith and his guys might have for us at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, we need to debrief on Daytona and see what we learned during the 6 weeks we followed this whole thing. The first thing, and I got the scoreboard right here, the first thing we learned is that Toyota has a sizable edge in horsepower over everybody else. Now, with NASCAR not allowing any body changes, that means this 500, just like everybody said in January, was all about horsepower. Toyota had it, the rest of the guys really didn't. We also learned that we didn't already know that Kurt Busch is the best driver on the tour. He had the best car, he had the car to beat, he got beat. He got beat in the last 20 laps because the Daytona 500 this time was like it's typically been. Boring for much of the race, and then the last 20 laps, everybody starts crashing, cars get loose, people make pit stop gambles, people stay on the racetrack like Dale Jr. did because he couldn't get through the radio clutter to his crew chief to find out if he needed tires or not with the 18 to go. And then a surprise. We got a surprise this time. It still could have been Tony Stewart and Kyle Busch 1-2, or Kyle Busch and Tony Stewart 1-2, and that's probably the way it should have been, except the two guys didn't really play partners down the stretch. Kyle Busch helped Tony win on Saturday in the Nationwide 300, but Tony decided the last lap, can't blame him for this, to go for the win. Didn't play really good teamwork, but then not many people do on the last lap of the Daytona 500, or the last 3 laps, which is what makes the Ryan Newman, Kurt Busch story so intriguing. Kurt, who had a terrible car after he crashed out with Tony Stewart in practice for the shootout a week ago, was resigned to starting from the last place on the grid and having a pretty rough day. Pat Trice and his crew chief did a marvelous job. They're running 1-2 at the finish. You can't beat success like that. That's a lot of hard work. The same thing for the Richard Childress bunch. They worked really hard. They had no horsepower. They were down 30 horsepower to the Toyotas for some reason, and somebody has to answer some questions about that. And yet there they were. Clint Bowyer was up front near the end. Kevin Harvick was up front. Jeff Burton was even leading the race, but no horsepower, couldn't stay there. Got swept aside. We also learned that Kyle Busch, if the race had gone caution-free, would have won in a round. We predicted that the first day of testing in January. It held up. We also learned that Richard Childress' 3 crew chiefs, Scott Miller for Jeff Burton, Todd Berrier for Kevin Harvick, and Gil Martin for Clint Bowyer, had a great game plan. They had to deal with no horsepower, and they did a good job. If they'd had another 10 horsepower, they probably would have swept the Daytona 500. Something to remember. That would have made it 2 in a row for Richard Childress. Not quite sure what went wrong. We also learned that the car tomorrow wasn't really a dog, but it wasn't a panacea. It didn't solve a lot of problems. Single file racing just like at Talladega. The Daytona 500 was pretty boring until the drivers started making mistakes, until pit stops became a crucial factor. Tires were a major issue. Drivers and crew chiefs were politically conscious and didn't really try to press the problem, though Kyle Busch, 22 years old, said they were just junk. Flat out. He's not too shy about speaking his mind. And that brings us to the report cards for the people involved in running the race. First, NASCAR. They get a B+. They stayed low, stayed out of the limelight. They ignored the calls that really didn't have to be made. They didn't try to press any of the issues. On the negative side, the reason they don't get an A is when Goodyear came up with this tire, NASCAR should have pressed the issue and said, hey, you got to do a better job. Goodyear guys, I love them. They're good, solid people. But this tire was not a Daytona 500 tire. I'm sorry. They brought the wrong tire. They should have brought a better tire. 25 laps, drivers had to race around the tires, and that's not the way you should have to run the Daytona 500. We said that back in January when we saw tire problems developing. Nobody did anything about it. Get a 0 on that. Lisa France Kennedy, the lady, Brian's sister, Jim's niece, who runs the International Speedway Corporation for the France family, did a marvelous job. This was the best Daytona 500 from start to finish in terms of logistics and traffic and just good old-fashioned fun that I've ever seen. It was amazing. She did a great job starting Friday night with the truck race. If you didn't see that truck race with the ambience, with the rock and roll bands and the country music bands, if you didn't see this Daytona 500, you really missed something. It was exciting. It was interesting. There was drama. There was drama. There was everything. These drivers showed me they're indeed some of the best drivers in the world. They took a bad situation and made it great. They put on one heck of a show. They kept their mouth buttoned. Ratings are up. It's good. Going on to California, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, these drivers get an A+. And if you didn't make this Daytona 500, you really missed something. Mike Mulhern for the Winston-Salem Journal and JournalNow.com. We're back on the road.